Alright, so Euphoria Season 3, Episode 3 has been released on HBO Max, and we are here today to do our review, our recap, and our breakdown for this episode. So to begin, this episode is titled The Ballad of Paladin, and make sure you go back and watch all the past reviews for these episodes so you can be all the way caught up for today's review. Now, this episode opens up with a breakdown of how Jules got into the escort business, which we heard a little bit about in episode 1, but we didn't really get to see it on display until this episode. Now, we got a lot of shocking scenes throughout this montage. We got even some like sick fetish content that they included in this episode, okay? But then we finally get to the point where she meets this surgeon, this plastic surgeon to be more specific. So this ends up being her main client and ends up being where she gets a majority of her wealth from, and ends up being why she's able to stay in this glorious, top floor high-rise apartment. So I thought this was a very unique introduction to this episode, and I think they did a really good job with this for what would eventually become, in my opinion, the best episode yet this entire season. So moving on, okay, we pick back up in the strip club that Rue is working in, and come to find out she's moving up the ladder when it comes to Alamo Brown's business. She's now getting into the gun trade. She's learning her way around artillery and things like that. She's involved in the making process of them and in the selling process of them. And we see these cartel clients having a great time inside the strip club. Now they end up going to the back room, and Rue is a pivotal player in the selling and the buying for guns, which I thought was very interesting character development for Rue. We get a hilarious scene of her presenting this advanced arsenal, and they do end up buying, and that's pretty much that scene there. So Alamo Brown is a lot more trusting with Rue these days, it seems. And then we move over into the next scene where he begins to get upset with her because she mentions how eventually she wants to go legit, and of course no career criminal wants to hear that their business is illegitimate, so he kind of pushes back on that. They get into a back and forth. She pretty much ends up bowing down and saying, okay, I'm fine doing what I'm doing. And while all of this is taking place, that same pig that we seen at the very end of the last episode ends up getting released into Alamo Brown's strip club, and he ends up putting a bullet in the head of that pig. We get a crazy scene of the blood splattering all over one of the strippers' faces, and I thought it was just, a really interesting scene there. Artistically, it was very well done, and this pretty much set the precedent for what's about to come later in this episode, with Alamo Brown officially going to war with Laurie. Now, Rue essentially tells Alamo Brown that Laurie happens to have a pet that is very near and dear to her heart, that being a parrot by the name of Paladin. So that's where this episode title comes into play. And then we move over into our next scene here, where we pick back up with Rue visiting Jules once again. We kind of get to see what happened at the end of the last episode, and then she ends up inviting Jules to be her date to Nate Jacobs and Cassie's wedding. Now, this is important because, of course, these characters had it out against each other all the way back in season 1. So a lot of this episode was like another reunion of our characters getting to see each other when they haven't seen each other for a very long time. Now, Rue has finally been making some money now, so that's how she's able to afford Jules to come with her. And then finally to get into the wedding, which is the big theme for this entire episode, this big over-the-top wedding for Nate and Cassie. We start off the scene with them having all of these nerves on their wedding day. Nate has been throwing up in the bathroom, has been avoiding Cassie for the last 24 hours. Cassie is freaking out. She doesn't know what's going on with Nate, doesn't know if the wedding's going to go as planned, but we do get to see that her flower plan definitely paid off, because quite honestly, I do want to say that she was correct. All right, I was trashing her in the last review, like how ridiculous can you be, $50K for some flowers, but it definitely added to the aesthetic of this overall wedding. Now, we see Maddie attending this wedding in some insane attire. Who dresses like this to a wedding? Okay, she clearly went to show out. We also see Cal notice Jules at the wedding. Again, that is what started their whole predicament all the way back in season 1, episode 1. So it was a nice full circle moment there. And then we finally get to the scene where Nate is waiting at the altar and Cassie is getting walked down the aisle by her mother, in what was a very interesting scene, because the entire time that she's walking her down the aisle, she's explaining to Cassie everything that went wrong in her own personal marriage, which was very strange, because it's like you're trying to let your daughter have the happiest day of her life, and this person means the world to you. Why are you putting all of this negativity inside of her head? And also, I thought your dad was supposed to walk you down the aisle, but Nevertheless, okay, they get to the altar, they say I do, they kiss, we now have a happily wedded couple, or so it seems, because what happens next in this episode is insane. And in the next scene, we see Laurie get word from Alamo Brown that Rue's going to be coming to do a pickup from her, and I guess they're planning on continuing their business agreements even though they've been having some issues with each other. So we end up seeing that scene take place later, but what happens next, we return back to the wedding. We see Cal at the wedding. This is of course Nate Jacobs' father, and he's giving this speech. He's very drunk, very intoxicated. Nate even sends someone over there to take the mic from him just in case he says anything too crazy. But honestly, it was a nice speech from Cal to his son on his wedding day. And this character has caused enough problems inside of this series, so I'm glad this scene wasn't another one of those. Now we get a scene at the bar between Jules and Cal. They catch up about how all of this predicament started, how this entire series started, and we find out that Cal is now on the registry from all his wrongdoings in the past, but also that Jules never got a call for what happened between them because, of course, if you remember back in season 1, Nate happened to look out for her and pretty much hide that recording for Jules. Now we see Rue in a rush to leave the wedding. She gets call from Alamo Brown that they must meet at this very second, and so she leaves to go meet Alamo Brown's main head guy. His name is Bishop. We've seen him a lot. I enjoy his character. I think he's done a really good job with his acting performance. He's just very stoic, very quiet, and very straight to business, and I like that about his character. And we even got to see a little bit more into his personality in this episode. But as Rue drives to meet Bishop, she gets a call from Fez, who of course is in prison, and she answers the call. Now at first I'm like, are we gonna get to hear his voice? Did they record some scenes before he passed? Sadly, no, you don't get to hear anything. Okay, they're just continuing with the storyline of this character, and she's telling him how much she misses him, and this character's apparently planning a prison break, and she says she'll be the first one there to pick him up if he actually succeeds. Now we move back over into the wedding with Nate's mother giving her wedding speech. Since Cal got to do his, it's now his mother's turn, and she is just dissing Maddie the entire time, damn near looking directly at her as she's saying all these terrible things. She doesn't name her, but she says, oh, the first girl he brought home was not right, so I'm glad he eventually found Cassie. And Maddie at this point is starting to feel some type of way. She's starting to feel a lot more emotional than she thought she would coming to this wedding, and after the speeches, they all sit there for their dinner, all right, at their table ahead of the wedding, and that's when the character of Nasim comes up. They call him Nas a lot, so I'll call him Nas also. Okay, so Nas comes up to speak to Nate Jacobs. This is of course his former business partner who he owes a lot of money to, somewhere in the ballpark of $600,000. And come to find out, Nate Jacobs ended up borrowing money when he was in the hole from people that he shouldn't have been borrowing from. Now at first, back in like episode 1, episode 2, I thought, okay, this is just a business partner of his, but of course he does like this contract work. But no, this guy is clearly tied in with the mob, the mafia, the cartel, something of that sort. And I think it's a very interesting direction for this series to be going in now. It pretty much threatens Nate very loudly. Not everyone could hear, but everyone sitting at the table and around Nate can clearly hear. And he says, like, listen, it's so disrespectful for you to throw this over the top wedding while you owe me this much money. This wedding looks extravagant. It looks like it cost a whole lot. Where did you get the money for this if I still don't have the money that you owe me? And he basically ends up telling Nate that he is going to be his worst nightmare, and he leaves the wedding. Cassie hears it. She starts freaking out. One of Cassie's best friends, and she's like the wife of one of Nate's investors. She runs off to her husband. She starts gossiping, saying, hey, Nate owes a whole bunch of money. She's been very messy these past 2 episodes. I really do not like this character, but I get it. She's looking out for her own. Now, honestly, we get a great performance from Sydney Sweeney inside of this particular scene. She's really showing her acting chops here because her eyes are just bright red. You could tell she's on the verge of tears. She's freaking out. She just found out that they're broke. She thought they were living this rich life, and so she's trying to hold her smile together, but you can tell that the facade is breaking. And she's like, yeah, why would I not be happy? It's my wedding day. It's the happiest day of my life. As you could see, like, this break in her psyche beginning to happen, and it was just a great performance from Sydney Sweeney. I don't know why they make her do all the ridiculous stuff, because honestly, I think she gives some good performances inside of this series from time to time. Now, it's time for Nate and Cassie's dance, right? The annual couples dance at the wedding. They're having their dance. She is on the verge of tears throughout the entire dance. They're having this discussion, and Nate's doing a fantastic job at saving face and holding everything together. All right, he's choosing, not to make a big deal out of the threat that he just received, and he's just going throughout his dance. He's telling Cassie, listen, hold it together. All right, everything is going to be all right. I got it solved. Now, of course, later in this episode, we discover that he definitely doesn't have it solved, and that definitely is not the case. Now, after the wife of Nate's investor complained, the investor comes to talk to Nate, comes to speak to him about the circumstance, and Nate is being Nate, okay? He convinces him that everything's okay, that his investment is in good hands, and that everything's gonna be all right. Don't worry about it. I got it solved. And like I said, Nate's doing a fantastic job at saving face, and I really love this scene. I love how manipulative this character can actually be, as we've seen throughout this entire series. Now we move back over into Rue. She finally meets up with Bishop, and they take off driving to Laurie's place, which they eventually arrive at. And while they're at Laurie's place, the bodyguard there ends up taking Bishop's weapon, and they go on inside to discuss business with Laurie, who, by the way, I find is giving a very interesting performance inside of this series, because the way her character comes across, it seems like she's off all of the antidepressant drugs possible. Okay, she's so monotone, and she doesn't give a reaction to anything really. She never seems surprised about anything, and it's a very interesting approach to the performance of this character. Now, back at the wedding, we see Nate and Jules finally catch up. He ends up thanking her for coming, and they kind of have, a nice little conversation between these two, considering all that's taken place between them in their past. Now, back at Laurie's house, Rue and Bishop, as they're discussing business with her, we get these awkward scenes of Faye getting just shared out between all the other men in the house. They're kind of fighting over her, arguing over her, being extremely disrespectful. And yeah, this character is just in a terrible circumstance, it seems. And we even get a scene between Laurie and Rue where she's asking, listen, I liked having you around. What would it take for you to come back to work with us? She says, listen, I'm happy working with Alamo Brown. I don't think I want to come back to work for you, considering all that they had her doing, swallowing drug balloons and all this different stuff. Things are seemingly starting to heat up at Laurie's place. Now, back at the wedding, Cassie has been drinking a little too much. She starts getting a little too wild. She starts screaming out Nate's business, her and her husband's business, damn near so everyone at this wedding can hear. He's trying his best to calm her down, telling her to relax, and that's when she lets off a bottle cork right into his eye, damn near, and he just gets pissed off. I thought he was going to do something here, but he doesn't. He just leaves, goes into the back. Again, he's trying his best to keep cool in these extreme circumstances. Now, while all of this is going on, I couldn't help but to just be reminded of the recent A24 film titled The Drama, starring Zendaya, which is also interesting because she stars in this series too, but it also stars Robert Pattinson. Make sure you go check out my review for that film once you're done with this video. I'll link it at the top. But it was very similar plot-wise, because the entire plot of that film is a wedding gone wrong, and that is exactly what this entire episode felt like. It felt like an episodic version of that film, The Drama. So I just wanted to mention that a little. For anyone that's seen it, you would have noticed the comparisons also. But anyway, it's time to finally leave the wedding. Okay, the supposed happily married couple ends up leaving in this limousine, and Nate is starting to sweet talk Cassie. Okay, she's starting to seem like she's about to have her own independence, but Nate quickly rips that away. This is one of the greatest manipulators we've ever seen on television. So he's talking to her, he's sweet talking his wife, telling her, listen, everything's gonna be okay, don't worry about it, we're gonna go home, I'll make love to you, okay, everything's gonna be fine. Once we wake up in the morning, you'll forget about it all. And she is finally starting to fall for him once again. But once they arrive at home, none of this goes according to plan, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but not before we discuss Maddie leaving the wedding. She arrives back at home. She seems again to have had some sort of emotional issues being at this wedding, as we could expect. I don't know why she went in the first place. Terrible character decision, especially if they weren't going to involve her in any type of drama that was going on there. I really expected that to be the plot line, but we never got that. It never came inside this episode, so that was surprising. Now, back at Laurie's house, as Rue and Laurie are talking, Bishop ends up slipping what seems to be some type of poisonous pill into Paladin's cage, into Laurie's parrot's cage, and he ends up wanting to kill that parrot for obvious reasons, right? They're at war right now with Laurie, but they're acting like they're doing a business deal with them at the same time. And this is Alamo Brown's way of getting back at Laurie for all the pig talk and for sending the pig back into her club. Of course, all's fair in love and war. Now they start to get into like this racial debate between Bishop and Laurie, which was very weird. Again, I never felt any racial issues out of this character until we got to season 3, and it felt like it came damn near out of nowhere. But then we get this whole like Western scene of Bishop. He's almost doing like this performance here. He ends up scaring them, and then he gets his gun back, and he leaves. Okay, his job has been finished. Their business deal is done, and he managed to slip the poison into the parrot's cage, so he got what he needed to get done. Now as he leaves, we see Laurie kind of looking at him weird. It almost seems like she could tell something isn't right, but she doesn't know exactly what it is just yet. Now as Nate Jacobs and Cassie finally arrive at home, and this is the biggest part of this entire episode, the most exciting part of this entire episode, we see that none other than Nassim, or Nas as he likes to call him, is waiting at their mansion and await for them to arrive at home. Okay, and come to find out, Nassim was not lying when he said that he was going to make Nate Jacobs' life a living hell for the disrespect that he showed him. And we really started to turn up like the mafia, the mob type of themes throughout this entire season with this particular scene right now, because a particular actor, right, his main goon, you can call him his main thug. I know goon's not really a word we say now, right? It means something else now. But Nassim's main guy starts beating the living shit out of Nate Jacobs. It was crazy as hell. He's beating them all up and down the stairs, throwing them all around the mansion, brutalizing Nate Jacobs in a way that we've never seen done before, damn near inside this entire series. I mean, yes, Euphoria pushes the boundaries, but we never got like ultra violent, which we definitely got inside of this scene. And I recognize the actor that was playing the bodyguard. Okay, if you ever watched Dexter, I mention it in a lot of my videos because it's my favorite series of all time. But if you've ever watched Dexter, this is a particular character from Dexter called Little Chino. It was a character that Dexter was hunting for a very long time. Not to go off on a complete side tangent, I just thought it was interesting, and it was good to see him back on the screen. So as he's beating Nate Jacobs to death, he ends up like throwing Cassie on the ground too, pushing her aside when she tries to stop it. Her nose is all bloodied up, she's bleeding everywhere. But what was interesting about Cassie's dialogue is she doesn't seem to care about Nate at all. She's crying, she's like, oh, my wedding's upset. And it's like, this dumb little ditzy broad. You know, I can't stand this character sometimes, but at the same time, I think she does give some good performances, so I'll allow it. Now, we get to the most brutal scene of all in this entire scene, and that is Nate Jacobs getting his toe cut off by Nassim in a very disturbing scene. This was the most brutal scene in all of Euphoria, and I couldn't believe that they went there. Okay, they crossed those boundaries, they went there, and now we're in violent territory for what I can assume is the remainder of this season. It was insane brutality, and I'm curious to see how they're going to top this in the next coming episodes. Now, to move on to, you know, the end result of the rest of our characters, we see Jules get home to her high rise. She notices that her surgeon is home, right? And she ends up like prettying herself up to get ready for the surgeon. And then in another very shocking scene, we move over into Rue, and this is the final scene in the entire episode. She ends up getting pulled over on her way home. We're like, okay, normal traffic stop, we're thinking, at least I'm thinking, but no, it's not. Once they get to that car window, knock, knock, knock on the window with the badge, and it is the DEA. All right, they found Rue. They somehow know she's been involved with all of this stuff, and they've been investigating her for who knows how long. Of course, she was crossing the border, things like that. So I'm assuming they've had an eye on her for a very long time. And it was just such a shocking end to the best episode yet. This was a fantastic episode here. Fantastic writing. I still have yet to see why this has been rated so low and why people have been disrespecting the series on such a major level. It seems like when I I go on Twitter, all I see is people complaining about this series. Like, I hardly see any good posts whatsoever about it. It's just people with the most minute complaints ever. Like, they're just trying their hardest to join in on the hate train, which in my opinion is kind of pathetic. Listen, if this was bad, I would be honest and I would tell you it was bad. And there's still room, you know, left for this show to not end up that good. Okay, it depends on the conclusion. But in terms of what we gotten so far, and in terms of this episode, this was a fantastic piece of television. This was the best episode yet. This episode exceeded my expectations on every level, and I couldn't be more happy with what I got to see take place. I'm loving this show right now. Can't wait to see what happens next in episode 4. And with that being said, let's go ahead and rate this episode. So if I had to rate Euphoria season 3, episode 3, The Ballad of Paladin, I would go ahead and rate this episode a 9 out of 10. It gets the 9 out of 10. Fantastic television, peak cinema, peak writing, all of that, okay? It gets all the badges, and I love what we got to see here. Those are my thoughts on this episode, guys. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this episode down in the comment section down below. If you don't know what I do here on Demigod AT, we do film, TV, and pop culture based content. So if you're interested in this type of content, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. I'll catch you in the next one, guys. Peace.